Great. So I know very little about technology and very little about kids. Um, but I have been studying all kinds of aspects of human motivation, and I think those are general to teachers, principals, and kids. And I'll try to tell you a little bit about some of our lessons about what motivates and don't motivate people. So the first topic I want to talk about is what is called social norms and market norms. And for the illustration, just imagine that you're a 24-year-old boy, that you've gone on a date, that you paid for dinner and a movie, and you're walking with your potentially romantic partner toward her apartment, and you're walking up the steps, and you really are hoping for a passionate goodnight kiss. And just before you lean in, you say, "Isn't it interesting that I spent $124 on the date so far?" How will the evening progress from there? There are some experiments we don't need to do. That's one of them. And if you think about it, there's really no revelation of any new information. Menus have the prices printed. We know how much a drink is. And despite the fact that there was no information being revealed, something very dramatically changed in the relationship before and after that statement. And this is a basic idea that often our motivation is not driven by the underlying motivations, but the underlying financial exchange, for example, but it's driven by how we think about that. So for example, imagine I asked you for some help. I said, would you help me change the tire on my car? Would you help me back up my computer? I asked you for some help. Think to yourself, what are the odds that you would help me? Right? And you don't have to answer, just think to yourself, how likely would you be to help me? What would happen if I said now, would you please help me change the tire on my car? I'll give you $3 for it. What would happen to your motivation? Would your motivation go up? You would say, hey, I get to help Dan, plus I get $3. That's better than just helping. No. It turns out that when we do these experiments, people's motivation goes down. People will say, oh, this is work. I don't work for $3. Give me 300, we can talk. And when we do these experiments, we get people to work, doing all kinds of menial labor, moving dots on computers and moving sofas and all kinds of things. What we see is people work hard for nothing. When we add money to the equation, work goes down. And if we pay people a ton of money, we can get people to work again. It's not that you can't buy people. You can buy people, but it's expensive. And with the low amounts of money, you can actually decrease motivation. And the idea is that there's this discontinuity, that the moment you add any kind of financial incentive, you basically change the way people think about themselves. They all of a sudden can't say to themselves, I'm doing this from the goodness of my heart. They're saying, I'm doing this for money? Is this really worth it? And all of a sudden, the mindset and the calculation changes. People view themselves differently, the task differently, and motivation changes. Okay, so that's the first observation, that financial motivation and social motivation don't add up together. Sometimes you add money to an equation and you actually make the total motivation go down. Now, the second thing is that in society we see lots of examples of people giving gifts to each other, right? And when you think about gifts, this is a very strange thing for economists. Right? If I invited you for dinner and you were going to spend $40 on a bottle of wine, that's incredibly inefficient, right? You don't know what wine I like. In fact, you might be spending $40 and I could buy wine I like even better for $20. So you should come to my house and say, Dan, thank you very much for inviting me for dinner. I was thinking of spending $40 on a bottle of wine, but not knowing which wine you like, here is $35, go ahead and buy yourself the best possible wine for this amount. That would increase the financial efficiency of the transaction. But nevertheless, it would not get us any closer to each other. It would not increase my motivation to help you tomorrow, neither your motivation to help me tomorrow. So sometimes in society we do things that we give up economic efficiency on purpose because it does changes the social contract we have between people. So we repeated our experiments with gifts. So in the original experiments, people did all kinds of things for nothing, small amount, big amount, and we saw this dip. What do you think happens when you give people a small gift? Here's a small candy bar. Here's a large candy bar. Do people get upset with a small candy bar in the same way that they get upset with a small amount of money? No, because a candy bar still keeps us in the social realm. You see, it's kind of interesting. We get to give things to people, but the moment we don't call it money, it doesn't transform people to all of a sudden consider the exchange in different terms. So when we give people nothing, small gift or large gift, motivations stay constant and very high. By the way, what do you think happens when we give people the small gift, but we tell them how much it cost us? Here's a 10-cent candy bar. So we're giving them a gift, but we're mentioning the money. Which one wins? The gift, making it in the social domain, or the money, switching it to the financial domain and decreasing motivation? The money wins. People get upset again. So just mentioning money, in fact, as in the opening example, going on a date, is sometimes sufficient to transfer people from a social norm to market norm. By the way, lots of workplaces in the last few years have basically have been writing on people's paychecks how much the company spends on their healthcare. You think you're getting this amount, but in fact, here's how much you cost us with all the other benefits. This actually takes a benefit that is a social benefit that gets people to appreciate some kind of social give and take, translating it just into money and therefore eliminating the value that it had from a social relationship perspective. Okay, so that's kind of the beginning building blocks of this. The next question is, what happens when we change relationship from one to another? So there's a beautiful paper by Origami and Aldo Rottecini, in which they went to a daycare center. Many of you probably know this study. They went to a daycare center, and this was a regular daycare center, and from time to time, parents were late picking up their kids. So what did they say? Let's put a fine. Let's punish the parents who are late. Now, if you had a huge fine, of course, parents will be late, or they will take their kids and move them to somewhere else. And the fine was about $5 an hour. What do you think happened? Now parents were really late, right? Because it's 3:30, you're supposed to pick your kid, and you say, you know, usually I would try to get there on time more or less, but it's $5 an hour, they can have my son until 7. You see, before they introduced the fine, it was guilt and a long-term relationship that kept people in more or less compliance. Like you would come late, and the school teacher would look at her watch and would look at you and would look at her watch, and she would make sure that you realize you were late, and you realize that she realized you were late, and that everything would kind of guilt would work its magics, and you would try very hard not to do it next time. But the moment it's $5 an hour, the computation is very different. All of a sudden, you don't care, right? It's $5 an hour, there's a price. What's the exchange rate? Is it worth it for me or not? Okay, they ran it like this for a few weeks. They discovered it was a terrible mistake. And then they canceled the fine. What do you think happened? Things got worse. Why? Because now there was no guilt and there was no penalty, right? And they said that guilt only came back a year later, right, for new school year. Very hard, where you can switch quite easily from a social market to a financial market. We can switch in that direction very easily. Switching in the other direction is very tough. And I don't know how you feel about the No Child Left Behind, but I think it's basically been an experiment in switching teachers from social norm to market norms. Not a controlled experiment, not a kind experiment, but it has the same elements, in which all of a sudden teachers and principals started to think about their own contribution to society in very different terms with very different rewards, and I know quite a few teachers who basically felt that their social motivation is undermined. Of course, we could have made it more extreme, but it's really in that realm that I think we've been really not thinking very carefully about what are incentives and motivations for teachers. By the way, it's not that you can't pay people. It's not even that you can't pay teachers for performance. It's just that the direct translation between money and motivation doesn't work in a way that you often expect. That you can actually add particular money to the equation and actually decrease motivation. I'll tell you one story about dating. There was a woman in New York who posted an ad on Craigslist. And she said that she's smart and attractive and wonderful in all kinds of ways. And she really wants to date men who make more than $500,000 a year. She has some standards. She wanted an apartment on Fifth Avenue. She had kind of a list of what she wanted. She said, that's what she wants. And she said she's been hitting a barrier at the 250. She's been unable to break that barrier. And she said, I need some advice. I need some help. And, of course, lots of people were upset with her. And by the way, it is true, statistically speaking, that more attractive women marry richer men. I mean, that's just a statistical reality. But saying it so explicitly and getting into the relationship in that mindset is a very different story. Anyway, from all the answers, one of them was particularly interesting. There was a banker who wrote her and said, I actually make enough money and I find you attractive and charming and so on. But he said, look at it from my perspective. Over time, your assets are likely to depreciate. And my assets are likely to appreciate. And under those conditions, I think I should lease rather than buy. Now, if you think about it, what this means basically is that if you frame the initial relationship in one way, imagine what it would be like to enter a relationship with this kind of an exchange, right? How would life day by day go? Right? And what's interesting about marriage is that it's a very incomplete contract. Right? So when you decide to marry, you don't write out what happens, how many times a week you'll take the garbage, and I'll do this, and what will happen. You could probably spend your whole life doing that, but we don't. We basically have this general agreement that you'll do the right thing, and I'll do the right thing, and in each point in time, there'll be fluctuations. Sometimes you'll work harder and I'll do something else, and sometimes it will switch. And we don't understand all the contingencies, so we're just going to have an incomplete contract. We're going to have a general agreement. And in relationship, we can't understand this. But then organizations hire lawyers. And lawyers don't like incomplete contracts because there's so much ambiguity. So they take contracts and they try to write all the specific details, right? But by writing all the specific details, they write what's in, but it's also clear what's out. And all of a sudden, we count less on people's generosity and goodwill and willingness, and all of a sudden, performance actually goes down. There's a very nice example that Barry Schwartz gave. He said, if you had a janitor in hospital, and you wrote a complete contract for his description at work, how many times he would take the trash and how many times he would do this and everything in general, would you include the case where somebody couldn't find their way? Would you include a case that if a patient fell down from their bed? I mean, you actually would expect the janitor to do a ton of things that you wouldn't be able to think about in advance. Because the reality that for almost no job we could write a full description of all the contingencies. But by the way, if any of us would be a janitor and something bad would happen, we would know whether it's part of our responsibility or not. But the moment you write a description, you write what's in and you write what's out, and with that you actually eliminate motivation to a large degree. There was a very sad study that a big car company in the US did a few years ago. This was when kind of the internet was very exciting, and they had this thing called reverse auctions. So this big car manufacturer went to their suppliers and said, you know what? We have 8 suppliers that all give us these screws. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a reverse auction. It will be open for 24 hours. And during those 24 hours, you would tell us what is the minimum price you're willing to sell us these screws. And you will see on the computer a graph that the 8 of you are competing and how the price are trending. And all of the 8 competitors came up and they posted prices, and over time, of course, they started competing. So the price went down and down and down and down. At the end of 24 hours, this car company was able to really squeeze their suppliers, right? They basically made competition incredibly salient. They proposed the lowest possible price, and they got this at the best possible deal. And they were very happy until a few months later they discovered that they needed a few more screws. And guess what? Now the suppliers was very happy to screw them over, right? They basically eliminate this willingness to work together. They said, you know, you screwed us up when you forced us to sell you at production cost. Now it's our turn to have a different table. So basically when we move from incomplete contracts to complete contracts, we change dramatically how people think about their job and how they're motivated to work. So let me tell you about an experiment we did with a big chip manufacturer. So this is a company that makes computer chips. Most of you have those chips in your computers. I can't tell you who it is though. And people who work for this company come for 8 days as a shift. They work for 4 days and then they have 4 days off. 4 days on, 4 days off. And on the days that they're on, they work for 12 hours a day, right? Long days, 4 days off. Okay. And the way this company has been working for a long time is that for the first day of the shift, of the 8 days period, for the first day, they determine a particular level of performance, and they tell people, if you reach that level of performance, you'll get $25. If you don't reach that level, you don't get the bonus. If you reach that level, you will get the bonus, okay? Let's call it Monday. Not always Monday, but let's call it Monday. And then there's no bonus on Tuesday, no bonus on Wednesday, no bonus on Thursday. And then 4 days off, and so on, okay? So the first thing we asked them to do is we said, can we have a control condition? Would you mind also adding a condition in which people get nothing? So at least we can see how much it's helping to give people these $25 if they reach a certain level. They said, okay. So then we said, you know what, we want something else. Instead of just nothing, control condition, and $25, can we also send people pizza at home? Can we take another group and say, if you reach that level, we'll send you pizza at home? And the idea was that this way we'll make them heroes in the eyes of their families. Turns out technically it was a little bit challenging. You know, I don't understand why, but anyway, it was a little challenging for their HR department. But they were willing to do. You have experience with HR, that's why you. Anyway, they were willing to give them vouchers for pizza. Not as good as actually sending it, but they were willing to give them vouchers. Okay. And then we tried our luck one more time, and we said, how about another condition, a fourth condition? No money, no pizza. You'll get a text message from your boss saying, nice job. Okay, so first of all, let's think about a few questions. On this first day, we have the control condition and we have 3 reward conditions. Do you think the reward condition did better, the same, or worse than the control condition? Does it work to offer people $25 of pizza or text? It worked. It worked. All of them worked. Very good. So money, text, pizza better than control condition. Now, which one of those 3 do you think was best? How many people vote for text? People vote for pizza? If you're hungry, it's more appealing. How many people vote for money? Okay, too many people have abstained, which is kind of not right to actually abstain, but I'm going to forgive you this time. But you know, the reason it's not good to abstain is because, you know, often I call my research center at Duke the Center for Advanced Hindsight. By the way, it's quite tricky to get government grants with this name, but we're managing. But the reason is that sometimes you get results and you say to yourself, oh yes, I knew it all along. but you didn't know it all along. But if you're not committing to an answer, you don't realize that you didn't know it all along because you can convince yourself that you did know it. Anyway, so turns out all three methods do exactly the same. Exactly the same. However, here's the interesting thing. This was the first day of the shift. What happened on the second day of the shift? The second day of the shift, remember, there was no reward. But were there any lingering effects for how people thought about themselves on the first day of the shift that basically continued to the second day of the shift? The answer was absolutely yes. What happened on the second day, people who were offered money on the first day performed 15% less than a control condition. These people basically said, yesterday you offered me money, today there's no money, I'm not interested in working. 15% less. It went slightly up the next day, slightly up the following day, but in total, compared to paying people $25, in this condition, so money had this nice increase effect, but huge decrease effect and then coming up. Text message had a huge increase effect, and the reduction was basically the control level. Slightly higher than the control level. And the pizza was kind of in between. It was somehow social, somehow financial, it was somewhere in the middle. But if you think about it, this company was giving people money on a weekly basis, and in total they lost about 7% of productivity for doing that compared to a text message, and compared to a control condition which they would have gotten, at least would have not cost them anything. And I think that it's an interesting thing to ask yourself, how good is our intuition really about human motivation? How good is it for the moment of human motivation? And how well can we predict the lingering effect on human motivation? Okay, I want to tell you one other story on a study we've done recently. This is a study we've done with a call center. When we do these experiments, by the way, we always look for things that we have good measurements of performance, right? There's lots of jobs where performance is really hard to evaluate. I think teachers are in that category. But people who work on a kind of repeated way and have multiple interactions and multiple production, those people really have good measurement condition for our experiments. So imagine people in a call center for a big hotel, and we measure basically close rate and how much they sell and so on, so we have some kind of good measure of performance. And we looked at the data from this hotel chain, and we saw that it was the same people who were getting the bonuses every week. They offered bonuses. Their bonuses were much larger. They were about a third of people's salaries. And we realized that it was the same people who got bonuses all the time. Now, if you saw this data, what kind of theories could you come up with that would explain why is it the same people are getting the bonuses all the time? What would be some kind of hypothesis that you would want to test? Right, the same thing happens in school. It's the same kids who are getting A's all the time. I mean, you can think about some parallels. But what would you want to test? What would be some questions you would have? Sorry? Okay, so maybe the people who are getting the bonuses are getting the bonuses because they have picked somehow better hours or randomly allocated some hours. So maybe there's some fluctuation there. That turns out not to be the case, but very good hypothesis. Yeah.
External pressure, like, they need the money more, so they're willing to.
Yeah, so these are people who love money or need money or something. So the money is a bigger motivator for them, and the other people don't like money so much or don't care about it so much, so they are not as motivated. Very good. What else? Sorry? Okay, so some people are really motivated by where they are located, and this is a competition, and they want to win. They don't care on what. It just happens that whatever they are measuring is also how they get paid, and they just want to beat other people. Very good, yeah. Maybe they're better at their job or they're smarter. Maybe they're better in the job or they're smarter, yeah. Yeah, so I think both of those responses are the same. In both of those, you're saying, you're really paying them more, but the money is irrelevant to their performance. You just have some good people who know how to do their job and some bad people. And you're paying these people, but that's not motivating them. Right? Actually, you know, when we think about bonuses, oh, sorry.
Or maybe the expectation on the part of the folks who are deciding.
So kind of the Pygmalion effect, that the employer expects some people to do better and they internalize it and create a higher motivation for themselves. Very good. Okay, so there's all kinds of theories that we can have. So we convinced this company to let us determine the bonuses. So what they did was they shipped us the data file, and we decided who would get the bonuses. And they told the employees that they hired an external group, and this external group was going to determine the bonuses. They didn't want to have any kind of fallout from bad decisions about who gets bonuses. And how do you think we decided who gets the bonuses? Randomly, very good. This is the hallmarks of experiments, is to do things randomly, because otherwise it's confounded, right? If you give the compensation to the people who perform better and not to the people who perform worse, you never know what's really causing behavior. But doing things randomly is the right approach to do any experiment. That's kind of the building block for experiments. And now we did lots of analysis, but in one of them, we said, is the company better off by giving bonuses to the top performers, or is the company better off giving bonuses to the bottom performers? What do you think was the answer? They were better off giving the bonuses to the bottom performers. Now, I'm not certain that this is going to be true in all cases. But when you think about performance, there's a couple of questions we need to ask ourselves. We need to ask ourselves, what is the ceiling of performance? Where are people compared to that ceiling? And we need to ask ourselves whether people can will themselves into a higher level of motivation. So imagine that you were a good singer, kind of naturally a good singer. You think it would matter if I paid you a little bit more or a little bit less? Like, what would you do differently? You would say, oh, you're not paying me enough, let me sing out of key, right? If you have a peak performance and you know what you're doing, it's actually effortful to do it in a different way. But if you don't know what you're doing, it might mean that effort could actually be helpful. But it's interesting that I think very frequently when we analyze motivation, we don't really think about what are the barriers for good motivation. We somehow assume, especially with the logic of bonuses, that people are lazy. And we say, you know, just not perform because you just don't care. So let me add a little bit of money. And you still don't care about your job, but you'll care about the money. And now you'll try harder. But is trying, can we try more? And if we try more, can we actually perform better? You know, completely unclear to me. So, you know, I teach, and I've been teaching for many years. Wow, many years. I still don't know what is a better class and a worse class. And if I got paid more or less, yeah, I could probably, you know, go over my presentation a bit more. But I don't really know how to teach better and how to teach worse. And I don't know how getting paid better, or even having actually, you know what, I assume that if they paid me based on the way that the students evaluated me, I would tell less jokes and give them less homework. But, tell more jokes and give them less homework, maybe. But this idea that we can actually will ourselves to higher performance by just trying, I think is a very strange notion in many areas of human motivation. Okay, so the last thing I want to tell you about human motivation is a set of experiments we did on very high incentives. So this question came a lot since the financial crisis about what happens when we pay people tremendous amount of bonuses. So we wanted to see what happens when we pay people big bonuses. So we created a set of 6 tasks, and we took 3 groups of people. And one group of people, we said, look, if you do well on this task, on these 6 tasks, we'll give you a salary equivalent to how much you make in a day at your work. 1 day salary for 1 hour in these 6 tasks. If you do half, we'll give you half. If you do a third, we'll give you a third. 0, we'll give you 0. Another group, we said, if you do well on these 6 tasks, we'll give you 2 weeks salary. Half, half, a third, 0, 0. And a third group, we said, if you do well on these tasks, we'll give you 5 months salary. Half, half, third, 0, 0. And we ran this experiment in India when we couldn't pay people 6 months salary. Now, these were different people in different motivation conditions. And what do you think happened to their actual skills? What happened to their level of performance? So lots of things are possible. What we saw was that between the 1 day and the 2 week, there was no difference whatsoever. And performance dropped dramatically for the 5 months bonus condition. Why down? Because money is a motivator and a stressor at the same time. Imagine I told you that if you told me a really funny joke in the next 10 minutes, I'll give you $100,000. How much of your thoughts you could use to search and think about funny jokes, and how much of it you will be stressed out? Right? Mostly you will be stressed out. And it turns out rewards are actually motivating because they are stressful. You think about the reward. Actually, if you think about the logic of the reward, it's saying, I want you to behave like this. I want to take this path to perform well, but you don't want to. So I'm going to put a ton of money there, and by chasing this amount of money and thinking always about the money, you will perform better. This is kind of a strange notion when you think about it. By the way, we did show that when it comes to simple mechanical tasks that you don't need thinking, more money is always better. So if I paid you to jump, I paid you more, you would jump longer, right? You would basically be more motivated. But if I paid you to think, to be creative, to come up with interesting solutions, payment is actually distracting rather than being helpful. By the way, when we started this experiment, we wanted to use the principle of loss aversion. The principle of loss aversion is the idea that people hate losing more than they enjoy gaining. And if you've invested in the stock market, you know what that feels. So in the first set of experiments, we prepaid people. So somebody came to the community center where we ran the study, and we gave them, we said, here's 5 months salary. It's yours. If you do all the tasks correctly, you get to keep it, but if you don't, you have to give us back the money. The first person in that condition completely choked. Couldn't do anything, gave us back 100% of the money. The second person in that condition, again, the same thing happens. Can't do anything, completely chokes, but then when he finished, he just ran away with all the money. And we didn't have the heart to chase him. And by the way, it's kind of interesting because we didn't chase him, but there were lots of people that we didn't pay, we didn't feel that bad about. But taking the money away from him was terrible. I mean, we didn't do it. After that, by the way, we had to move to a different village because our reputation in that village was ruined. But if you think about it, it means that if people count on their bonuses, smaller amount of bonuses could actually stress people to a higher degree. Right? So if you're a banker and you're already counting on the bonus to pay school tuition and yachts and whatever you're buying, all of a sudden not getting it, you're counting on it, so it's part of your endowment, the bonus is much more stressful. So when you think about all of those things together, it basically suggests that human motivation is really very interesting and very complex. And you have to think about what kind of levers do you want to pull to get the maximum performance from teachers, principals, kids. And what are the kind of things that are rational and irrational in those terms? And I'll give you one last example. And this is something we call the Akia Effect. Anybody here has Akia furniture? Few? My personal experience with Akia furniture, and tell me if you agree, was that it was an incredibly frustrating experience to try and assemble this thing. The instructions are awful. Statistically, I placed too many pieces in the wrong direction at some point. But when I finished, I kept on moving this particular mediocre piece of furniture with me for many years, for many houses. And I started wondering whether my attachment to it somehow was part of the fact that we spent a long afternoon together. And I was in charge of it to some degree. So anyway, so we did all kinds of experiments. We didn't use it with Akia furniture. We started with origami. So we gave people paper and instructions for how to build origami, and they built origami. And these were people who never built origami before, never created it. It was really ugly origami. And then we said, look, you have been working for us. This is officially our origami, but you know what? We are willing to sell it to you. And we say, how much would you pay? And they said something, how much they're willing to pay. Then we took the same origamis, we show it to other people, not the people who build it, and we said, how much are you willing to pay? And they said, basically nothing, right? So the people who built the origami thought that was kind of good, useful origami. The people who didn't thought this was useless. Now, the next question we had was, are the people who built the origami know that they love it but that nobody else would? Are they realizing that they are trapped in their own perspective, that their own labor led to this love of this particular origami, but that for anybody in the outside world this would look like a crumbled piece of paper? The answer is no. They were sure that other people would love it too. And then we did the next step, which is what Akia furniture is all about. We made the instructions more difficult. What happened? The objective quality of the origami dropped because the instructions were more difficult. But the love of those people to their origami increased. So other people hated it more, they loved it more, just because it was harder to create. Now, of course, the extreme version of origami and how labor leads to love is, you can think about kids. So imagine you don't have kids, and you go to a park, and you meet two kids, and you play with them for a few hours, and it's getting dark, and you say goodbye, and just before you go, the parent said, before you go, in case you're interested, they're for sale. How much would you pay? Right? And think about, in contrast, to how much would you sell your own kids? Right? So unless you have a teenager, which I understand is a special case, most people say, my kids are fantastic, unique, gave me meaning to my life, and so on. I'm not interested in selling that experience, and so on, even if I'm promised I'll have a good home. But getting other kids, even if they were just the same, not that interested. Right? And when you think about it, it says that the kids are kind of an extreme example of the Akia effect. Right? The reason we love our kids so much is partially because of the amount of work we've put in. It's not so much them, it's us. It's the amount of work and labor, and the instructions are unclear. I mean, very difficult to do it. Now, we've done this experiment also with ideas. We asked the question of whether when people create ideas, or if they think they've created ideas, they're more attached to those ideas. And the answer is yes. The answer is that it's incredibly easy to get people to be attached to their ideas. So for example, we gave people a list of 8 questions, like world problems, how you reduce pollution and so on. And we gave them 50 words. And you say, please use these 50 words to construct a sentence that will be the solution for that. And we put the words there, so we knew what they were going to come up with. There was not really many options. There was one option. And they all came up with the option we wanted them to come up with. But just this exercise of searching through 50 words and coming up with a solution by their own made them more committed to it. They're willing to spend more time. They're willing to donate more money. I mean, really higher attachment. And if you think about this, and I think this kind of relates to the talk that was just before me, there's a real question of how do we give kids ownership on what they're doing? I think there's a lot of things that I remember from my own school, which was, of course, many years ago, in which we purely followed the recipe. This was particularly salient in chemistry and biology labs. When we were just going to do something that other people have done before, that the results are perfectly clear, and we were just going through the mechanics. But there was no way to own it or feel proud of it. I mean, the most we could do is we could say we have followed the recipe exactly. But there was no way for us to feel any pride or any connection or to feel that it is ours. From that perspective, by the way, I think that going to teaching social science is much more interesting. Because in chemistry, you really don't want to give kids lots of flexibility in terms of what they're doing in the lab. In social science, there are all kinds of options. People can change even small things and feel much more connected to what they're doing. So the world of motivation is really very interesting. You know, we all have kind of naive intuitions about what motivates us. We usually think these are high-order ideals and goals. What motivate other people? Usually other people are much simpler and more mechanistic. And what motivate kids? And you know, some of these motivations are rational and some of them are irrational. But figuring this out and finding the optimal mix of motivation is crucial. And you know, it is crucial because the task of learning is a really tough task. It's very tough to think about something that would materialize in 20 years from now and to be motivated for that. And to think that we could tell kids, you know what, school is really important for your future and therefore you should do it, ain't going to work. In fact, I can't think about a single case in which people have been motivated by something that will happen in 30 years from now. Just as an example here, how many people here in this room in the last month have eaten more than you think you should? Exercise less than you think you should? How many people here have ever texted while driving? Honestly. Okay, some of you I'm lying around, but that's okay. Last question. How many people here have ever had unplanned, unprotected sex? No, it's nice that it's so few. You know, all of those are clear demonstration that when it comes to our lives, we are really doing incredibly stupid stuff that is good for the moment without thinking about the long term. You know, and it's not very different for kids and for everybody. And because of that, we cannot think about long-term motivation as something that would actually change behavior. We do need to think about the motivation at the moment. We need to think about something that would overwhelm boredom and difficulty and challenges and procrastination and so on. And I'm happy that you are tackling this problem and not me, and thank you very much.